Hi, welcome to the Other Part podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Fox. Thanks for joining me today. So, here's what you can expect from this podcast. Here is where statements are explored with the goal of understanding what it's really like to see it from the other side. The simple goal of doing this is just to understand what the other side is like. We'll be having a conversation every single week. We'll be having a variety pack of different personalities on the show, promises to make an interesting conversation. So, a little backstory of about how this podcast came to be. We've always had some very interesting, controversial discussions amongst ourselves, and we often said that, this would actually make a good show. And finally, we did it. And here we are today. Let's get started. Joining me, we have Martian, and I'm going to turn it over to Martian.
Okay, cool. Hello. I'm Martian and I am trying to be debative and not combative today. No, that's a joke. I'm usually not very combative, but I am passionate about things. So I thought that this podcast was a cool idea. I'm also just like very interested in controversial topics or just like topics that I don't think are talked about enough. So I think that's pretty cool. I actually don't know much to say about myself otherwise other than I just like talking. I don't necessarily like listening to myself talk, but I like listening to other people and their opinions and see where that goes. So yeah, that's little old me.
Thanks, Martian. All right, and now we're going to turn it over to Orange Joe. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Orange Joe. Shout out to everybody who gets the reference. I'm just here as that guy who, as Martian said, likes to talk. So just to give my opinion on certain topics and how I view certain things, I think it's going to be very interesting. So, and I do love to have these deep dive discussions, right, about certain topics. I find them very interesting. So I'm just here to give my feedback, and hopefully we can all reach at a equilibrium by the end of it. By the end of it.
Thanks, Orange Joe. And about me, I'm Mr. Fox. My personality, I'm the type of person that really likes to think about the most logical approach to something, and that's usually what I run with. Something else about me that y'all should know. Yeah, I kind of take myself a little bit too seriously. So, with the roundtable that is currently here, this definitely promises to be quite interesting. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about sensitivity. Sensitivity, we want to find out, is there really any equality when it comes to sensitivity, or is it that people just really expect to receive sensitivity and not give it? Martian, what do you think about that?
Sensitivity is an interesting topic. It does depend for me. I think sensitivity or seeing people as sensitive, as someone who sees themselves as a sensitive person, in some cases, it just depends on what you're sensitive about. So it can be something like trauma or something trivial. And it just takes what empathy, I feel like is the word, or some kind of like consideration or compassion about someone's feelings. I definitely was not this open to it at least maybe 3 years or 4 years ago. I was a lot more, I'm trying not to swear, but I was just not the greatest when it comes to like understanding people and knowing where they're coming from and what their sensitivities are. But it's an interesting like approach for sure, because there's a lot of things that people are sensitive about, and where do you draw the line on what someone's quote unquote allowed to be sensitive on is an interesting thing.
Thank you for that. Orange Joe, what's your take?
To be honest with you, I'm the type of person where I always say I understand and I get it why some people react to certain situations, but I can somewhat come off as a bit insensitive because you could say I take a lot of things as jokes. You like make fun of things, but I don't know. With sensitivity, it really depends on the person because for some people, you can make a joke about something with some persons and it's fine, but you make it with others and it's not fine. And as Martian says, it can be based on their own experience, what, them growing up and experiencing, they see things differently. Personally, there's some things where I think is just like flat out taboo, like, making jokes about that, just, yeah, because those things are just fundamentally wrong, in other words, right? So basically make fun of, like they're not things to make fun of. But then there's other things, like I remember when I was in high school, my friends made like dead baby jokes, and I was just like, wow, you guys are crazy. But a lot of people would be like, why would you be making jokes about dead babies and blah blah blah. So I don't know. Sensitivities, I don't. It's really dependent on the person, honestly and truly. But I personally, I like to be free when speaking. I like to, like, be able to make fun of and make jokes of certain situations. But I will be respectful of those. If the situation where they express to me that, hey, I don't like this because of X reason and so on and so forth. So that's my real take on sensitivity, really.
All right, good. All right, thanks for that. All right, let's backtrack a bit. Let's take a look actually what the definition of sensitivity really is. According to Macmillan and dictionary.com, their definition is as follows: the quantity of understanding how someone feels and being careful not to offend them. With that definition and the topic at hand, I do personally feel that it's something that's really not equal in any way, shape, or form. A lot of persons seems to take more than what they give when it comes to that topic, based off something that we all said. It brings up this follow-up question of what is the difference between being sensitive and someone's ability to take a joke? If you're just running a joke and you don't mean anything by it, but however, someone finds it offensive, do they have any right to feel sensitive about it? How do you feel about that, Martian?
It's a slippery slope on what is considered a joke and what someone can be sensitive about or over. I think over the years, I feel like we've learned what is or isn't funny, right? And back then, like it was just a product of its time, but there's a whole category of offensive humor. But if you are joking, I think about a disenfranchised group and the person that's making the joke isn't a part of the disenfranchised group, then the joke is at their expense. And it's not a case where the joke is maybe you're laughing with them and you're laughing at them, then I feel like I'm not at liberty to say what is or isn't offensive about that, because I think sensitivity is more than being offended. I think it's more about being triggered in a way, which is a branch of offensiveness, but it just affects them differently. I think I'm not triggered in the SJW quote unquote sense. It's just more of what you can make jokes about. So like people on Twitter all the time would say, "Oh, initials." Or little words or letters at the end of a sentence to indicate that it's a joke or sarcasm or serious, just for people who are neurotypical or on the spectrum to understand that it's a joke. And other people are like, yeah, well, I'm not going to do that because I don't think it's necessary because this is the internet. Is Are the neurotypical people supposed to be offended because of they don't want to do that? You know what I mean? If it's a personal choice, it's just an interesting like slope of what's supposed to be offensive nowadays.
To mention or to add to what Martian was saying, it really and truly, as you said before, like a lot of things, offensive humor was a product of its time because we think about YouTubers like, what was his name, Onision, if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm.
He could not work in this day and age. He could not survive in this day and age. As in, I remember growing up and listening to a lot of stuff that he make jokes of and whatever, and I found them hilarious, to be honest with you. And I guess it's because I understood that it was satire. I understood that it was like being funny. I understood that it wasn't him just trying to be mean, right? But I think we've gotten to a stage right now where, personally, and this is just my personal opinion, I think people are taking this whole being sensitive things or being politically correct a bit too far. Whereas I don't feel like comedy is dying because of it. I just feel like people are more restrictive to what they can say because of it. Because they're afraid that, oh, they're gonna offend somebody, to the point where, as in, like, I understand that there's just something that I mentioned before that shouldn't be joked about, and that's fine, I get it. But now you're on like this thin ice, as like, what is offensive? Next thing you know, you said something that's innocent to like 1,000,001 people, but one person offended by it, and now it's a completely bad thing. It really, as I said, it depends on persons. It depends on their experience. It depends on how they see things. I just wish that sometimes people would understand that this is satire. Is not to be offensive. Is not to be hurtful. It's just a joke. But I guess in this day and age, that's just not something that really works well with 2020, 2021. So yeah.
Marshan, can you just give us some information as to what SJW is for those of us who don't know?
Oh, so SJW is it's a popularized term back in especially 2016, 2017. It stands for Social Justice Warriors. And it was basically used for people who would advocate online for human rights, like feminism, most notably LGBT, rights and stuff like that. But it kind of got trolled along the way. So a lot of people nowadays see SJW as I'm using air quotes as I say this because it's not even a term that's taken seriously anymore. It's no one uses it seriously now because of how much it's trolled. It's a term that's now used as an offensive term, but back in the day it was used as just a term for online advocates for human rights. Basically, that's all that it was. And now it's just a trolled out term by people who thought that the feminist movement especially was getting quote unquote out of control, and really it was just white feminism, propelled by white women who had just wanted the same rights as white men, and that was it. There was no intersectionality, so it got just really trolled by red-haired women in glasses saying that fathers they shouldn't exist and yada yada yada. So no one really actively calls themselves that anymore, but I used it to coin the term like back then, where this sensitivity movement really stemmed from, which was 2015, 2016, 2017.
Okay, okay. Let's revisit the topic of what a joke really is. I'm hearing that persons, when they make jokes, if they make an announcement really that it's a joke, recipient may hear it and not pick up that it's a joke. The recipient still feels offended by it. What then?
Well, if this is the case, and this it has to do with how well you know the person, but I can say, because it just depends on how much you know the person. But if it is expressed, if the person who is hurt by the joke expresses that this is something that they'd rather not joke about,
Hmm.
I am personally of the belief that it's a case where you didn't mean anything by it. Yes, you tell them that it's a joke, but you don't make the joke again because it's something that they've expressed that they're sensitive about. I, for one, am good with adjusting. I'm fine with just like altering things that I make fun of or things that I don't think people find funny. I try to alter that when I'm around the person, or even just in general if I realize it's affecting like a larger group of people, because I used to be of that mindset back in the day. So I feel like if it's communicated that it's a joke, but the person is still hurt by it, you apologize, you take ownership, you did hurt them with that joke, regardless of if it was a joke, and you move on.
All right, but that brings back into play another question, which was brought to you by Orange Joe. That may just be their personality, and they obviously don't mean anything by it, but the recipient just takes everything that Orange Joe says as an insult. So now Orange Joe is feeling uncomfortable trying to interact with this person, especially if this person is supposedly your friend. How much should somebody change and alter themselves for the sake of somebody else? Because everything that comes out of your mouth is just insensitive. So, what does Orange Joe do then?
It's a matter of how much you value the person's friendship. If it's a case where you cannot alter yourself beyond this much, like that is your bandwidth, then it's something where you'd have to just discuss not being as close. It's I personally am for one where if somebody is not good for my peace, I am going to exit that situation, friendship, relationship, whatever it is. And it's like if you have a hard time adjusting to that person's needs, or if you think that that person is too sensitive or too overreactive, then I just think it's highly possible that you're not compatible, whatever it is, friendship, relationship. And if you're not compatible because the person's unwilling to adjust their language around you, and you're always going to be very sensitive, then it's not a match made in heaven. It just isn't. And it's not going to work if either party isn't willing to compromise. It just isn't. It's going to be difficult every time. You don't want to feel like you're walking on eggshells around somebody. That isn't healthy for either of you. It really is just how much you want to be friends with this person.
All right. In regards to what you just said, the thought came to mind that I often hear people tend to say, "This is me. I'm not changing for anybody. Take it or leave it." How is
Mm-hmm.
that statement any different from what you just said? Because to me, they actually sound similar. It's just that you
Mm,
just make it sound more politically correct, putting makeup on a pig,
mm.
really. So, how is it really different?
A hard pill to swallow for people. This is me, take it or leave it. If you can't handle me like this, then you just don't deserve any of me at all. Yada yada yada. I think it's a way of not confronting your toxicity. So
Mm,
if you aren't willing to confront how your actions are harmful to people, then it's not, you're not going to be self-aware enough to realize how it's harmful at all in general, because you're not able to have that self-awareness to know why it's harmful to someone else, or try to understand it on a deeper level, rather than, oh, this thing I said hurt someone's feelings. It's just that's all it is on the surface, and you don't try to go in deeper than that to understand why it hurt this person's feelings, if that makes sense. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but a lot of the times people who say stuff like that, like the quote that you just said a while ago, like, this is me, I'm not changing for anybody, it's a way to ignore negative aspects about yourself, because literally no one is perfect. And if you can't find that you have some negative things about you that you need to work on, then it's going to be difficult to actually fix those issues within that relationship.
Orange Joe, how do you feel about what Martian just said?
I've heard a lot of people say a lot of things about, people who are offensive and people who are being whatever and blah, blah, blah. Something that I always thought to myself, or something that I've conversed with never acknowledged, you saying that somebody is offensive when they're just trying to make a joke, right? You mentioned that there is toxicity or they have negative traits among themselves. Not too far back, the very same joke that they made was funny to all, but it's just now that we're in an era of, I don't know what to call it, where they're now seen as offensive. How can I put this? Does that make them an actual bad person, or is just a situation where they were what is okay then is not okay now? Because you telling me that I am toxic, it makes me feel as if I'm a bad person, but I know I'm not a bad person. So what's really happening here? Because I know what I say is not to offend you or not to offend anybody, it's just a joke. So what's happening here? Am I really just an awful, terrible person that needs to be thrown away, or is there a situation where, as really and truly, some people are just a bit too sensitive? And this day and age, can you actually say somebody's been oversensitive or somebody being too sensitive to anything nowadays? Can you actually say that? Because it seems as if a situation where it doesn't matter what it is, as long as someone's offended by it, it should be acknowledged. Because I think being oversensitive or being too sensitive does not exist in this era anymore. Once you feel offended, you're offended, and you should be validated, which is true. But then
I think
it
I
feels as
think
if
Oh, go ahead.
I'm gonna become the devil's advocate here with this
Mhm.
conversation, because it feels as if I'm gonna be the one to say that, oh, you're being too sensitive, when really and truly in this day and age I don't think that exists anymore. So I don't know.
To jump off what you said really quickly, I think
Hmm.
I think I don't want to say as if there aren't overly sensitive people that exist. There is such a, even if the person wants to be validated in their like feelings that they're having, they can still be considered overly sensitive.
What is an example of someone being overly sensitive?
Overly sensitive would be the best example I can find that I've only heard about just recently is, I don't know if you know about like the lesbian flag and the gay flag, like for gay men. Apparently, some group of women who, treasure the lesbian flag says that the gay flag should not exist because it's copying the lesbian flag and it's misogynistic. That, I believe, is oversensitive because it's throwing offense where there isn't any. If
Mm,
that's a perfect term. You see, if you're offended over something that it's objectively not offensive, then I consider that oversensitive. If it is an objective thing that this is not actually true, this is not something that is misogynistic, you can't just call it that. You can't just say words and expect me to say, oh yes, that is true, correct. Not everybody deserves to be validated in something that is not true,
So,
right?
so in that situation, it's a matter of like the majority rules, because if you have more people who believe that that is true, whereas the gay flag is more misogynistic and the lesbian flag is just being copied, then what will happen? Wouldn't it be a situation where we end up in a case where, that is now true? We're saying, okay, then the gay flag needs to be getting rid of now because there's like a million to one women, million women to one persons who are saying that yes, it is bad, so let's get rid of it.
That still doesn't make it right, because if you check the internet, we can see that the gay flag was invented before the lesbian flag.
Hmm.
So there is no such thing as it being copied. It's objectively false. You know what
That
I
is
mean?
true. That is very true.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm thinking here now, when it comes to sensitivity in this day and age, is more as if the facts don't matter, is how you feel.
Yeah, I say
So
that's a conservative thing that people say that facts don't matter, your feelings don't matter, only facts. Facts over feelings, that type of thing.
exactly.
And I understand. I get it. Really, I do. But there are lines. There are literal, like, if you can literally search this and research this,
Mhm.
and we can see that this is true or not true, then that is a fact, and it doesn't matter how you feel in regards to this fact, because it is untrue, and you can literally hurt people in the lies that you spread about this,
Hmm.
right? So
Okay.
if it's a case where you are spreading misinformation and you are propelling this movement that is not based in anything, you're just saying something's misogynistic, because a lot of words now become buzzwords because people learn new terms nowadays, and like toxic, problematic, misogynistic, these words are no buzzwords that people throw around anywhere if somebody does something that they just don't like.
But in that situation though, wouldn't it be seen as if like, those persons who are doing this whole, get rid of the gay flag, wouldn't it seem as if more now they're trying to push an agenda as to being like sensitive or being offended? It's more like they're just trying to saying that, oh, men are just the absolute worst, and we're seeing, and anywhere we see where balls
Mm-hmm.
come in, basically needs to be get rid of basically. So if it's not 100% women, then it's basically garbage. So let's get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't that be seen as somewhat more of like an agenda than them being like oversensitive?
It's a white feminist thing, and I keep using this term because it's always them doing it. White feminism are people who are upset and offended about men man spreading. That is not something to be offended over. You get what I'm saying? Like, there are lines to what
Mm.
is and isn't offensive. Like, if you're saying Father's Day is offensive, it shouldn't exist, that is inflammatory and dumb. You get what I'm saying? Like,
I
there
get
are
you.
just lines that you shouldn't have as something that should be considered sensitive, because there are people who use it and weaponize it against other people, and that doesn't make any sense.
So who do dictate these lines? Who confirm where a line is drawn and where a line isn't drawn?
There isn't anybody that dictate these lines, it's literally just like, it's just you using common sense and saying, is this statement true? Does this statement make sense? Is this human being physically affected by this? Like, just certain things that I use as a checkbox, because everybody is not going to agree with me. I know
Mm.
that. I'm an adult. I don't need everybody, every single person to understand me.
Mm.
So I'm going to use my common sense and know that, okay, I know that I'm a human with a certain level of empathy. And I know that this thing objectively is not or shouldn't be offensive. So
Mhm.
if somebody is saying, hey, why do we have Father's Day? Men suck. It doesn't make any sense to me personally. Like, of course, like you have men that suck, but that doesn't mean that Father's Day should be eradicated because it's for celebrating the fathers that do exist. You get what I mean? It's just a fine line. And for example, Ricky Gervais, I don't know if you know him, he's a very popular atheist stand-up comedian, and he
Mhm.
also does like he's taken a huge fall from grace recently. And I
Mhm.
used to watch him a lot back in the day. And rewatching a lot of his stuff, I realized that he made horrible racist jokes.
Oh my.
And back in the day, I would laugh at those because he's making fun of like Asian people and Middle Eastern people and stuff like that. And you didn't realize it because it was just a product of its time. And then like as you get older, you realize it's not necessarily that we're just now becoming informed on what's offensive. We just got old and realized that this was wrong because we were kids. I now look back on it and I'm like, damn, like you're funny when you're talking about like Noah's Ark and stuff, but when you get into other things, it's just like yikes. It just depends on what you're mentally aware of. I'm not gonna go and be like, oh, cancel Ricky Gervais because he did this and said that. I'm just gonna be like, okay, I'm just gonna quietly not listen to you anymore because a lot of your humor isn't really funny. It's just inflammatory and shock humor. You know what I
so,
mean?
so I have a question about that particular situation. Him back then was like that. Is that how he is now?
Yeah, I'd say that he's not much changed. He still makes certain jokes. He was in the office, the UK office, not the American
Hmm.
one.
Hmm.
And a lot of people didn't like him in there. The entire joke was that he was not a good character. And I think I didn't watch it, so I don't know. And I think he recently came out and was talking about it and all sort of something. And he just went off. I don't know why. And he still seems to have the same sense of humor. He does have a quite the mindset of these are just jokes. You should just
Hmm.
take it as a joke. It
Hmm.
shouldn't be offensive to anybody because his entire brand is just offensive humor. And if like I feel like Cat Williams said it best. If you can't make a joke without being offensive, then you shouldn't be a comedian because if that's literally all that you have. Mhm.
This is my observation, and I believe it was already mentioned. It's all about how I feel, and that's what's taking precedence over the facts of it all. As you mentioned with what happens with the flag. Let's put it this way. Oftentimes I see repression or them or persons just being overall jealous because they feel that men or even the gay community would be getting all of this red carpet treatment. And while the other groups, they're seen as subgroups and they're seen as lesser than. So they fester this hatred and overall jealousy. And they're like, what about us? What about us? And then along the way, they fail to think. I say they failed to think logically. The gay flag was here first. So you feel that the gay flag shouldn't exist. So what exactly should the persons of the gay community do? Even though you're the one who is the offended party, the two of you are involved. So you can't just approach this to say, me this, me that, me. What is this other individual supposed to do? Which happens to be an innocent bystander who is totally clueless about all of this. Persons are just more concerned about how they feel. At no point in time do they ever consider how the other person feel. What are you supposed to do, especially when you don't mean anything by it? Is there any equality towards this in any shape or form? Because I'm not so far, I'm not hearing it. Uh,
Mm,
Mm,
well, just to say something. Based on what you said earlier, and the whole situation with the whole gay flag thing, I think what I got from what you're saying is basically you shouldn't be pulling down someone to get you, to get ahead. Basically, saying that okay, I want attention to give attention to what's happening to me, but that means that well, in this case, you want lesbian flag or lesbianism, whatever, to get attention. So let me put gays behind me or to the side while I get the spotlight now or whatever. So in other words, it shouldn't be a case where you should be bringing down another group just to get your group ahead. In other words, so I guess that's where the equilibrium needs to become around. We need to come in this situation.
Yeah.
In regards to what you asked a while ago, I think it's too one-sided in a sense. Whereas basically, if you don't acknowledge how someone feels about something, you are automatically just the worst. And this is why a lot of people tend to be the way they are when it comes into that, because people say, as you said, I'm not going to change myself because I'm not being offensive. I'm just making a joke or whatever. People would more to actually try to defend themselves because you're basically calling them a horrible person. Nobody wants to be called a horrible person. But by you getting quote unquote offended and basically saying, "Oh my God, you're not considering my emotion, what I feel," but then and the same like you're not understanding or you're not considering the fact that I am not being offensive, I'm just making a joke. Yeah. And I think what happened in this day and age is that it's more now leaning on the side of the person who is being offended more as the person who just like, made a joke or just made a statement. So now it's just like, okay, so once they feel offended, then you should be thrown away in the trash and never be heard of ever again because you're basically garbage. And yeah. So I don't know if there's a situation we can come to an equilibrium where we're saying that, okay, I understand that you're making a joke, and also another party, I understand that this does, this actually hurts you, right? I think what would be best would be more of a situation where I make a joke, person starts crying basically, and it's just like get a scene as the worst. No, I think it should more be a situation is like the person who's offended goes up to you and say, "Hey, I know that what you're saying was a joke, but to be honest, based on my personal experience, it was, it's a little bit, let's use triggering to use to find a better word to say it. It's a bit triggering." And then they have that discussion between each other, and then they work towards, what would be best for them. If a situation whereas, either party is like, okay, you need to stop, and the other person like, I'm not going to stop, then better to just part ways and call it a day. But I don't think there should be any finger pointing saying that, okay, you're just a drunk and you're just a baby and whatever. Because at the end of the day, all that does is just cause more conflict between the two parties as opposed to an actual resolution as to what would be the middle ground. So I don't
Okay.
know if that would be kind of solution. I don't know if Martian has anything to add to that.
Well, yeah, you I said that earlier, I think, but you went into it a bit deeper, so that's good. It's just a case where compatibility with you and the person. You have a certain sense of humor, and that person doesn't necessarily find those things funny. You can throw around like a particular slur that you just say regularly, like the N word, and you say that normally, like that's in your vocabulary as a Black person. But another Black person might not like you using that word around them because they don't personally like it. They don't want to claim that word as just as an example. Then you either acknowledge that this is something that is harmful to them and you just don't use it around them. Doesn't have to leave your vocabulary. But if it's a case where they're telling you, hey, don't use this word at all, or we can't be friends. Don't use it around me. Don't use it when you're not around me. Just cut it out of your vocabulary. Then that's not okay because it's not a word. It's a word that's harmful to that person specifically, but they want to cut it out entirely. It's like vegans. They have a lot of them. I'm not gonna group all them together, but a lot of them have this god complex where they feel like they're saving the world by not eating meat, and you know and they think that everyone should do it, and by any means necessary, by walking into establishments and pouring blood on the ground and showing factories where animals are getting slaughtered on a TV for everybody to see and stuff like that. It's forcing your side on other people who necessarily aren't harming anybody directly, but you want them to align with your values. And I think that's where the problem lies. If you're a person that doesn't really have like a major platform and this is just your personal life, and someone says, hey, don't do this around me, I think that's adjustable. I think you can work with that if you value the person as a friend to say, hey, okay, this is harmful. I'll try my best not to do this.
Okay.
Or if a
Hmm.
person has gender neutral pronouns and they prefer to be called they and them, you can adjust according because it takes $0 to do so. Back in the day, I would have thought it was ridiculous because I didn't understand as much.
Hmm.
But now I realize that it literally takes nothing from me to just correct myself if I slip up, or just to respect whatever pronouns they prefer.
Yeah.
It takes for me to just adhere, or like be less harmful and be a better person to that person, or just in general, then I think that's fine. It's just when it comes to forcing it on you, or telling you that you shouldn't do this just in general, if there's something that is comforting to you and isn't harming anyone else.
I just want to give you like a really good example of what you mentioned earlier, especially with the N word. There was a situation where it's basically they used to live here in Jamaica and using the N word wasn't a problem. They migrated to America where it became a problem. I didn't know this, right? It was until they pointed out to me that using that word with them is now, there's a lot of negative connotation to using that word around them because of their personal experience being over there. However, they didn't go along the line of saying that, oh, don't use it ever again because it's mega offensive to everybody and you should never. No, they literally just had a conversation with me saying, hey, so what I have to go through when I'm here, that is just not okay with me. And I understood because I've seen what people have to go through, especially if you're, African American over there. I see what people go through, and because of that, I'm like, okay, let me adjust accordingly, and there was no problem. I now have the mindset that when talking to them, I can't use that because I know how it affects them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to stop using it entirely because I still use it with making jokes, talking to friends out here, but because their culture is different, I have to respect it. So that's just me giving an example of what you were talking about, where like we understood each other based on each other's experience and based on us valuing each other, basically. So
Would you say that a possible solution for us to actually gain equality when it comes to sensitivity is we just need to look at it differently? Like, for example, having an interaction with somebody that you actually know, who is your friend, someone who's just a coworker, and you know that this person is an upstanding citizen, they pay their taxes, they don't go around making fun of people, don't go around being a troll. That's just not them. But the one time they say something that triggers you, you launch on an attack to say that this person is utterly the worst thing ever. How can you be friends with this person? Run to HR trying to get them fired when something that the person said, it meant absolutely no harm, or should I say that was not the intent. Why can't you see it in that light? Unless it is something that is so triggering to you where it causes you that, significant amount of pain, similar to that example that you just gave. There's one thing to be using the N word where you live in a black country versus where you live elsewhere and actually have to experience racism. It's a total different experience. And as you said, you understood that and you just simply adjust. It wasn't a big deal. But I find that both parties fail to really try to put themselves in the other person's shoe. What are the elements in their history as to why this is so triggering to this individual? And I feel that we ask them the question of, why does this bother you? And they attempt to give an explanation, but because you don't understand the explanation, you then shove it off and say that this person is too sensitive. Will that be actually a solution if we actually just take a look at it differently?
well, just as Martian said, it's like, it's empathy. She used that word, and I think that would be the key here in these situations. I would say in that I'll actually hand this over to her so she can expound on that.
Perspective is a huge thing. If you can, and not just empathy, but just like consideration, considering the person's actual feelings, because I know a lot of people have a hard time feeling empathy, at least to the degree that some people do. Some people have higher levels of empathy than others, and that doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. I just think it's harder to understand people when you've been raised differently. You've been raised not to find certain things like that offensive, then it's harder for you to understand why another person does. But if you can consider the person's feelings, even if you can't put yourself in their place, that would be a good place to start. Just considering how they feel and understand, because at the end of the day, impact over intent. Whatever your intentions were, the impact is already there on the person that was impacted. So your intentions could have been the purest Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, right? If the impact is there on the person and it is a legitimate thing where it was harmful to them, even if it was just an innocent joke to you, it it, it it's still worth looking into, especially if you care about the person or if you're friends or in a relationship with the person. It's worth trying to understand where they're coming from or why. I try to give more of myself to understand nowadays more than ever, because I realize that it is an increasingly more self-aware society, people more self-aware of their traumas and their triggers and what bothers them. And like I said, I consider myself to be a sensitive person, just not in the sense of like, jokes and stuff like that, if it's not like a serious joke, if that makes sense. But my feelings are very easily hurt. I'm going to just say that it may not appear so, but it does. So with that being said, certain things that do hurt my feelings, it's not going to be the same for other people. Anyone else can be like, it's just a joke, I don't get why they're upset. Anyone can say that to anybody, but it just matters how it affected you. And if it's something that is to a large degree, people can see that it is offensive, not like the whole gay flag lesbian thing or the Father's Day thing, or those things that are very, very trivial, very, very inflammatory without a lot of basis. Just simple perspective and compassion can, just a simple conversation can actually save a lot of friendships.
But how is that going to be possible when it's still one-sided? Like, for example, I would say that all of us here, based on this conversation now, engaging on this topic, when any of us, we would try to reach out to the person and, as you said, have a simple conversation. But what if they're just not willing to listen? So they're not willing to listen to say that, hey, I'm sorry that, this offended you. It really wasn't my intent, and I see that it hurt you. But the person is still, don't talk to me, you're disgusting, get away. And similarly, the person who is sensitive, who is trying to think about this logically and not trying and not make it an issue, approach the person who said something that triggers them to say, I know you don't mean anything by it, and that's just your personality, but it really bothers me. And then this person just laughed off and said, Chuck, why you're too sensitive? What then?
In both scenarios, if the person that was offended and the one that is deemed the sensitive one is saying, the damage is done, don't talk to me again, we can never be friends, even after the person, if it's a good apology, like they acknowledged the hurt, took accountability and apologized, that in itself is the ingredients to a good apology. If they've done that, then there's not much that can be done. You If the harm is already there and it is permanent in that person's eyes, then you've done what you can do to reconcile. I don't think we can go as far as to try to not necessarily beg but lament the person to talk to you again even after that, because you've done what you can. But if it's a case where the party that did the offending is still offensive to the topic, like even if it's not the same thing, but if they're still offensive in general and they aren't adjusting to the person, then it comes back to what I said about compatibility. It's not going to work, because that person's personality is a completely different one than what you can handle. And it's not either necessarily either of your faults, because what that person could be saying could be completely harmless in just outside of the context of it hurting you, if that makes sense. And it's not to say that that person's a bad person. It's just the compatibility issue where you and that person cannot coexist peacefully, because there's always going to be a moment where someone feels like they're walking on eggshells, or someone feels like they're one joke away from having a breakdown. You know what I mean?
I think that's my biggest problem with this whole scenario. I think is the whole idea of casting blame, meaning that I think that's what should be removed from this equation, where somebody basically labels somebody as being either an awful person for being offensive or somebody being a baby for being too sensitive. I think once that can be removed, I think that would be the solution. But as Martian said, I think if one party is not willing to try to understand the other, then it's just a lost cause. Like genuinely, there's not much you can do. I think it's unfair for somebody to tell somebody to not be that way. Like under any circumstances, because in the day, if it's you're the one who's been offended because of something in your personal life, then that's genuinely on you, and the person who you're interacting with, if they understand that and they'll adjust for you, that's fine. But for you to tell them that, oh, you can't be that way anymore and blah blah blah, no matter what the situation, I think that would be unfair to them. But I think mainly my main gripe with this entire sensitivity topic is just once blame is being cast, because you see, once that's done, I think that's where the real conflict comes in. I think that's why when a lot of persons, once people saying that, oh, you're very offensive and you're being whatever, but I think that's why they're more to reinforce who they are, because they're saying that, hey, you're just being a crybaby when I don't mean anything by it. If you feel offended, that's your own fault, right? So I think that's why they end up actually being worse than how they were before, because they're trying to reinforce the fact that, hey, it's just you being overly sensitive as opposed to me um, you know, being a jerk, basically. And I think if it was a situation where an actual peaceful conversation could have just been made, I think it wouldn't have reached that point. I think if a case where we could understand each other saying that, hey, I get that it's a joke, but based on what I've experienced, it still bothers me. And then they come to an agreement to say, okay, I get that. That makes sense based on what you've explained to me. So I'll adjust accordingly. So, yeah. But once either party decides to them not budge, then honestly, I think it's time for those two to just go their separate ways, as Martian said.
Yeah, pointing fingers can cause a lot of people to be defensive. It's never fun to feel like you're wrong in any scenario. No one likes being wrong. Okay. So I feel like whenever that immediate blame is casted on somebody, they will immediately start to feel villainized and lean into that role because they already start being seen that way, especially the person that is the offensive party. The
Exactly.
so it's easy to fall into that role because you feel like you've already been seen as a bad person, so it doesn't make sense you even bother trying. It's easy to fall into that role because I fell into that role before. I have a friend that does it every single time. Whenever somebody upsets her because she said something that other people didn't like, or if somebody upsets her by saying something, then she responds doubly worse. She just responds worse. She says the most heinous stuff because she knows that it will offend somebody.
I'm somewhat like that, by the way.
So it's easy to lean into that role that's already being placed on you because your reaction is to defend yourself. It's human nature to defend yourself. And I think a lot of the people who get this villain stick thrown at them aren't necessarily bad people. I think they just lack a certain amount of awareness to control not everybody. There are some people that are definitely horrible,
Okay.
but I think a lot of people just don't understand themselves or what they said or how it affects people. They genuinely, I think some people just genuinely don't know, and they just, the part that makes them a bad person is their refusal to understand. And if they don't understand and they just see themselves as this glorious good person because I know myself, I know that I am not a bad person with any bad intentions, so anything I say goes because I know I'm not a bad person. Horrible mindset to have,
Okay.
because then you don't become self-aware. You don't realize how much it impacts other people. You don't see outside of yourself.
I decide that in the acknowledgement of what you just said, I realized that this person just really doesn't know any better. And I just then go forward and I just choose to repress how I feel, because outside of the sensitivity issue, this person is an overall awesome person. They're there, they're supportive otherwise. They just are not that person who's capable of giving you the emotional support that you need. So, you being in it, me being in acknowledgement of that, I just choose to bottle it up. Would that be a good solution for anyone, really?
No, but I'm
Um,
biased because I'm a bottler. I'm a bottler. I bottle things because I feel like
actually,
I am, like I said, I'm too sensitive. I feel like a lot of the times I do not say things that bother me because I feel like it's going to just cause too much of a fuss and I don't want to get into it because it's just, it's you know what? This was like 2 months ago. I don't want to bring this up now. You know what I mean? So it's hard to say. It's not a good thing. I know. I can say that for sure. Bottling things is an unhealthy coping mechanism because you don't feel like your feelings are important enough to address.
I have a question in regards to that because when you say you bottle it up, right? Because you guys know me to be the type of person where nothing really bothers me. I'm unbothered by a lot of things. Me being unbothered by something, would that be considered me bottling up something or bottling up,
No,
expressing how I feel about something, or is it just a
no,
situation where I'm just like, it's whatever? Because I personally see, like, I've had situations before where I don't realize something is a problem until somebody else points it out.
no, that's definitely not
So
you bottling it up.
no, that's completely different, correct? I just want to get
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
clarity
No,
because
yeah, that's different.
so when you say bottling up, it's more a situation where it actually does bother you, but you just try to not make it bother you.
You try to ignore it and you keep it in to avoid conflict because you know it's not really, you feel like it's not going to get anywhere. You feel like you're overreacting or you're being too sensitive about a certain situation.
Or even a third scenario, whereas you don't want to open your mouth, and then when you get the confirmation, it went nothing like that, and then you're just deemed as the crazy person making trouble with these insane scenarios in your head when nothing like that ever
Yeah,
happened.
that's yeah, because sometimes you can, it will feel like you're reading way into a situation
Mhm.
when the other person doesn't necessarily mean it in that way or they did not intend for it to be in that way. And because you feel like you know the person's heart, you
Mhm.
feel like that's definitely not what they meant, but it still bothered you. So you're just like, all right, I probably shouldn't say anything. This don't make no sense. I just should keep it because this isn't worth bringing up to be seen as like crazy or overly sensitive or just like dramatic or whatever other word there is. So you just kind of keep it in and you repress it because it, you don't want to really get that out cause any problems.
So that means that you end up in a situation whereas, well, all right, you see, all right. I think I am the one who tends to be the person who says something that bothers somebody and they do come to me and they do something to me and then I think what happens in a lot of situations where it eventually explodes. Like a situation comes
Mm,
up and they're just like, you know, they start to explain to me what really bothered them. Like I said something or I did something a long time ago and they didn't say anything then, so I'm just like, so go on, yes or no. I bring this up as to say that 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 is a very interesting situation because yes, it may be true where it's like it isn't really a big deal, but then what do you do as a person as to how you feel about it? Like, do you just lock it away forever and hope it doesn't ever come back out or whatever? I know to say that it's wrong to do that. I mean that you should probably
mm.
express yourself, but at the end of the day, when you're in that position, like it's hard.
Yeah.
Like
When
it's hard.
when you have
Yeah.
the thing to reveal, it's difficult to say it and it's not good. Repression can lead to like things like brain tumors and headaches and depression and all these other things. And that's not fun, but you don't really know how else to do it. And the longer it gets, the less you want to actually say anything because you feel like it's just too far in now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I guess we can
Mm.
all agree that it's something that should not be done. But my question is now, how does one avoid something like that?
Uh, it just depends on the person because a lot of the times this is done with people who are closer to you rather than
Mm-hmm.
like people who are strangers. Typically
I
things,
disagree.
oh well, I guess for me, let me say for me personally, then for me, it's typically done for people who are closer to me. I don't tend to get like hurt over things that people who I have no idea, I don't know them that well, or I don't know that they exist outside of the internet, or I call us friends, but we're not close. Certain things don't bother me as much as when it does with people who are close to me, whether I'm in a relationship or they're like a close friend or a best friend or whoever it is. As long as it's close to, as long as they're close to my heart, then it will bother me. And that's where the repression comes in, because I have a problem with conflict.
Mm.
That's my demon, one of them. I don't like arguing. I'd rather shoulder the blame than actually have the argument, because I just don't want to, because it gives me a lot of stress. But that's a completely separate topic. For me, it's just people who are closer to me. And it's harder to have that conversation because I tend to feel like things can explode very quickly and I'll lose the person. So I just don't talk about certain things that do bother me, because I feel like a lot of the times, a lot of relationships, even if they aren't, they are unstable. Like just a small thing can be just an atomic bomb and it just explodes, and the entire relationship or friendship finish because of that one thing that I just decided to say.
All right, from the conversation, I'm trying to figure out what really is the solution towards equality. And the best answer I can actually come up with is that one, don't make a decision when you're in your feeling, because that's where all of this leads up to. Because every solution that we have all came up with, there's a counter for it, and it just doesn't seem like there is really a solution to make it equal. Yes, repression is definitely not good for anyone in any way, shape, or form. But at the same time, you don't want to be a burden to this other individual, because it can be a bit much, where every day is like, oh God, what did I do now?
Mm, 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 mm,
And
mm.
as Orange Joe said, you don't want to be walking around eggshells. What do we really do? I think it's just going to be a subjective issue, different strokes for different folks, and you are just going to have to find a customized method that works for you and that individual. And also, as Martian said, it's a compatibility issue. So, as much as this person is best person ever and supportive in other matters, but if they're not overall good for your mental well being, then unfortunately, you both may just have to part ways.
To be honest with you, I really do believe that if you're close enough with somebody, then you should be able to have that conversation with them, despite believing that it may be an issue. Because even for me, as a person on the other side, if I know that, if it's a situation where I know that the person who I value is somewhat easily offensive, right? I'm always, as I said, I'm always gonna be worried about, them probably thinking something I said is bad when, it wasn't intention. So I end up in a situation where I'm just like, should I probably go back and say something about what I said? Or like, are they nowhere about this? Should I worry that this is gonna come up later on or whatever? Because really and truly, a lot of people would think that, people who are oblivious to what they say would are just oblivious, mean that they just live their life being good and great and wonderful. But for me personally, if I know who I'm speaking with can be easily, well, not easily offended, but can be offended by certain things that I say, I'm always going to be in this constant. I'm actually going to end up having anxiety because of it. Because now I'm
Exactly.
going to just be like, so I said X, and the slightest little indication to me that it may have offended you will put me on the edge, because now I have to be like, okay, so do I need to prepare myself for having a possible conversation? Should I prepare myself? Whereas if we end up getting heated, this may come up and I have to address it. Like it stresses me out as well.
Yeah, I get that, but it's also going to stress out the other person who's sensitive as well. Because
And
at the same time, it's like every time you say something, they're going through a million and one scenarios. He said X, I interpret that as Y. But do they really mean Y? And thinking about it for days and weeks when it really means nothing. So now they are filled with anxiety as well, wondering if you are the spawn of Satan or if they're just overthinking it.
overthinking. communicating or communication really is very important. So yeah, that's all I said. Because at the end of the day, it's gonna end up being both parties, and if we don't communicate each other, then we're just gonna end up being on this horrible, horrible cycle where we just feel like one feel as if they're being a bothersome, the other one feel like they're being an asshole when they're not. So yeah, you may go ahead, Martian.
As I was saying, as someone who has been on like both sides, the person who has done the offending or a person who has been offended by
Hmm.
something, I've been on both sides where I didn't really understand why what I said hurt somebody. And I've been on the end where someone said something and it hurt me. I think at the end of the day, a lot of people want to be understood, but not understand. And it really comes from there where you have to have both. You have to both understand and want to be understood because everybody deserves to feel understood. And once you, like you said, Orange Joe, if you just communicate, I feel like a lot of these issues can be fixed with a conversation. And if we have these conversations whenever the issue arises rather than bottling it up, that would be easier to fix. I feel like saying things when they do bother you, no matter how scary or you don't want to confront it or you don't want to have to deal with this, it is better if you want the relationship or friendship or whatever it is to work down the line. You kind of have to have both.
And I want to add something else as well, where I've been guilty of, because this is more for the person who the other party who in this case would be the person who said something offensive or whatever, and the other person come to them. I've been guilty of doing something whereas they'll come to me saying that, hey, what you said the other way kind of bothered me a bit, and I'm just like, why about you? Like, you know me better, so well, go on. I think that as well is something that I've been trying to work on, and I think other people should work on as well. It's just to say,
Mm,
because I realize what that does is that it makes it harder for that person to come back to you with regards to a situation again if they feel a way about something, because they end up saying to themselves that if I go to this person, try to explain to them why I feel the way I feel about this, all they're gonna be is like, why I feel suffer, where you go and suffer, what wrong with you? You know me know better. When I behave yourself, calm your tits. What go on?
yeah, it makes
Yeah,
it harder to come back, and that leads to the repression when you dismiss the feelings that were communicated, even when it was so hard to communicate in
the
the
first
first
place,
place.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something I know for a fact I've been guilty of and I've been trying to work on. So that's just to say
Mm-hmm.
that's something that that party, that side should definitely also be mindful of. I know it's funny
Mm-hmm.
because I'm the one who did it. I realize it's very easy too, because a lot of times certain things you just be like, you don't think about it. You don't think it would have been a problem, but when it comes up saying it was a problem, you're just like, why is this person having this problem though? Like, why are we like on it? So
Yeah, it's
it's
harder to see. Yeah.
yeah, it's literally very easy to be dismissive when you didn't even realize you're being dismissive.
Yeah, that's why I said thinking like perspective, like what Mr. Fox said, perspective is important because if you know that you're not troubled by this thing, it's hard to see outside of yourself to see why. So it's quick to just say this shouldn't bother you because it doesn't bother me and my intentions are pure. So
We are going so far.
stop being offended about this thing. You know what I mean? It's a
Mhm.
very non-apology apology when people say I'm sorry you were offended. It's not really saying I'm sorry for hurting you with my words. I'm just sorry that it bothered you.
Yeah, I'm sorry that you feel that way, because
Yeah,
that's just you.
basically. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it's a non-apology apology, and a lot of people have realized it now
Mhm.
that that is the reason why. And I think we also need to allow people room to grow. It's very easy to villainize somebody for making a mistake or doing something like that and seeing them as that type of person forever.
Yeah, that's on the opposite end. Yeah.
Yeah. So if it's a case where you can see good in the person, then I think they should be allowed that time to just like get good, if that makes sense. Just like understand and develop that empathy, especially if they weren't exposed to it a lot, especially if the type of person that they are, they don't understand a lot of stuff or why things tend to bother people. If you give them room, I'm not saying to allow or subject yourself to abuse in the name of growth,
Mm-hmm.
No, but to understand that everybody is fallible and flawed and human and deserve some kind of just like retribution, because if they can are open to learning and
Mm-hmm.
open to understanding, then they're open to growth.
Definitely agree. My final thoughts on this topic is basically it's a combination of everything that was discussed today. Both parties just really need to listen to each other. Martian said, all of us as human beings, we all have the same fundamental rights. We all want to be heard. We all want to be loved. We all want to be understood. But if both parties are not willing, then it's just hitting a brick wall.
Mm,
Um, there's something that I've said in the past that I don't need you to understand me. I need you to respect me. And if we all are capable of taking that approach, things will be much easier because I have offended persons a lot and totally oblivious to it. And then when I found out that this person is offended, and like, why? And then when I find out what they're offended for, and I'm like, really? That's what you're offended for? But at the end of the day, they're the ones who have that feeling, and this is important to them. And I value this person, and I don't want them to feel devalued in any way, shape, or form. So I'm simply just going to adjust because their life experience is not mine. So what's hard for them is easy for me, and vice versa. We all just need to remember that we're all different. We none of us are the same, and all of us do need to make compromises if we are supposed to ever have any harmony, any at all.
here, here, I agree.
100%. I guess my final take on it is just to say that, um, try not to cast blame. Try just to understand, no, not understand, but try just to talk,
And
communicate.
listen.
What more in the mouth and what more in the ears than to each other. Please and thanks.
It's just listening. A lot of people will hear what someone says, but they
But not
don't
listen.
listen.
Yeah,
Yeah, listening is actually taking it in, understanding, realizing stuff like that. If
processing
you,
it.
yeah, processing it and sitting with it and realizing a lot of things and gaining perspective on the other person to know why. I've just seen conversations that started out strong, and when you have another conversation with the person, when you both cool down, how much more perspective you gained and understood. You just need some listening. Don't point blame immediately, because then you both look dumb. you know
Yeah,
so all you need to do is just understand that people are effectively human and will just slip up sometimes and deserve just a moment to understand based on a conversation. Once both parties are willing, both parties aren't, just won't work.
yep,
Ties need to be reevaluated.
yep. Go your separate ways. You go
Mm,
to east, they go to west, and move on the hell with life.
mhm.
Yeah. So,
Thank you, Orange Joe, and thank you, Martian, for joining us today. And also thank you to all our viewers out there, or should I say listeners. To learn more about our podcast, please visit us on social media. Just type in Odda Part, that is ODDAPART. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. Drop us a message or just participate in the comments. Thanks for joining us again, and we'll be back next week. Take care.
See ya.
au revoir.